London, the city of power, elegance, and prestige. But hidden beneath its shining skyline lies a story soaked in blood and fear. In the heart of the East End, two brothers rose from the gutter to become the most feared men in Britain. Ronnie and Reggie Kray, identical twins with unmatched charm and ruthless ambition, built an empire that blended celebrity with savagery. They shook hands with movie stars, smiled beside politicians, and ruled the streets with guns and fists. To the public, they were glamorous icons. To the underworld, they were merciless kings. But what the world didn't see was the darkness behind their smiles, the madness, the violence, and the paranoia that tore London apart. Behind every nightclub light was a shadow, and behind every smile, a secret soaked in blood. This isn't the legend the newspapers sold. This is the truth they tried to bury. The Kray twins weren't heroes. They were predators disguised as gentlemen. And tonight, we unmask the devils who turned London's nightlife into a kingdom of crime, terror, and betrayal. Stay with us, because this story will change the way you see London forever. The story of the Kray twins begins in the rough, unforgiving streets of London's East End, a place where poverty, pride, and violence walked hand in hand. Born in 1933, Ronnie and Reggie Kray grew up in a world shattered by war and hardship. From an early age, they learned that power was the only language people respected. The twins were inseparable, one mind, two bodies, united by loyalty, but divided by darkness. As young men, they took their natural aggression into the boxing ring, where they quickly gained fame. But fame wasn't enough. They wanted dominance, not just over opponents, but over the entire city. Using charm, intimidation, and brute force, the Krays built a criminal empire that blurred the line between high society and the underworld. Their clubs became the center of London's nightlife, where film stars, politicians, and gangsters all danced under the same roof. Behind the glamour, however, was a world of fear. Those who crossed the twins vanished. Ronnie's violent temper and growing paranoia made him unpredictable, while Reggie's cold ambition kept their empire alive. Together, they turned London into a city held hostage, where even the police hesitated to challenge their rule. But power built on fear never lasts. The Krays' reign would soon spiral out of control, and the same city that once adored them would watch their empire crumble in blood and betrayal. The story of the Kray twins starts long before they became legends of crime. Ronnie and Reggie Kray were born on October 24, 1933, in Hoxton, East London, an area battered by poverty and war. Their mother, Violet, was fiercely protective and adored her sons beyond measure. Their father, Charlie Kray Sr., was often away as a trader, leaving the boys to grow up in a world where toughness was the only shield against hardship. From the very beginning, the twins shared an unbreakable bond, loyal to each other above everyone else, even the law. As children, they were mischievous, fearless, and constantly getting into trouble. Their teachers couldn't control them. Their neighbors feared them. Even at a young age, they had an aura of authority, as if they were destined for something much bigger than the East End streets. When they discovered boxing, everything changed. The ring gave them purpose, discipline, and a taste of fame. The Kray brothers quickly became local heroes, earning respect and recognition as promising fighters. But the same aggression that made them unstoppable in the ring also made them dangerous outside it. After a few successful years, their boxing careers ended when they were drafted into the army. But the military couldn't tame them. They refused orders, attacked officers, and eventually deserted. This defiance marked a turning point. They realized they didn't want to be controlled. They wanted to control others. And so, their path toward organized crime began. By their early 20s, the twins were already running protection rackets around the East End. Shop owners paid them not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Their reputation grew fast, and soon they opened their first nightclub, the Double R. This wasn't just a business. It was a front for their new criminal empire. Inside, London's elite rubbed shoulders with mobsters, and the twins stood at the center of it all, charming, dangerous, and untouchable. Reggie was the calm strategist, sharp, articulate, and business-minded. Ronnie was the muscle, unpredictable, violent, and terrifyingly loyal to his brother. Together, they were the perfect balance of brains and brutality. As their influence expanded, they began taking control of other clubs, betting operations, and protection networks. Every rival who stood in their way was either bought off, beaten, or buried. But it wasn't just fear that made the Krays powerful. It was their image. They dressed like movie stars, drove expensive cars, and attended high society events. They understood publicity better than any criminal before them. The newspapers called them the darlings of London's underworld. They posed for photos, gave interviews, and even mingled with celebrities like Frank Sinatra and Diana Dors. The public saw them as glamorous gangsters, gentlemen with a dark edge. Yet beneath the tailored suits and polite smiles, the brothers were building something sinister. An empire built on intimidation, silence, and blood. Anyone who defied them paid the ultimate price. The East End had never seen power like this before, and soon, even the police hesitated to interfere. By the end of the 1950s, the Kray Twins had turned from local street fighters into the undisputed rulers of London's criminal world. But as their empire grew, so did their ego, and Ronnie's unstable mind began to show cracks that would eventually tear everything apart. The making of the Kray Twins wasn't just the birth of two gangsters. It was the birth of a legend built on fear, family, and an unbreakable bond that would one day destroy them both. By the early 1960s, the Kray Twins were no longer just local toughs. They were the beating heart of London's criminal underworld. Their power had grown beyond the East End, stretching into the city's most glamorous districts. Soho, West End, Whitechapel. Every street, every club, every deal seemed to pass through the hands of Ronnie and Reggie Kray. But their rise wasn't just built on money. It was built on intimidation, loyalty, and an empire of fear. At the center of this empire were their nightclubs, Esmeralda's Barn, the Double R, and the Kentucky Club. These venues became more than places of entertainment. They were the Krays' headquarters, where business, crime, and corruption merged seamlessly. Celebrities came to drink and dance, actors, singers, and politicians, unaware that just beyond the velvet curtains, deals were being made with blood. The Krays carefully crafted their image as London's celebrity gangsters. They were charming, polite, and impeccably dressed. To outsiders, they looked like gentlemen, but those who truly knew them understood that every handshake came with a silent threat. Their criminal network expanded rapidly. Protection rackets brought in steady income. They demanded fees from bars, clubs, and shops in exchange for safety. Safety from the Krays themselves. Those who refused quickly learned the price of defiance. Beatings, kidnappings, and public humiliation became tools of control. Ronnie, in particular, relished violence. His unpredictability terrified everyone. He could laugh with a man over dinner one moment and pistol whip him the next. Reggie, meanwhile, was the face of respectability. He handled the finances, kept the books, and made sure the business appeared legitimate. But behind his smooth voice and calm demeanor was a cold enforcer. When someone had to be dealt with, Reggie ensured it was done quietly and efficiently. Together, the twins created an aura of invincibility. Even rival gangs like the Richardson brothers knew better than to challenge them openly. Their mother, Violet, still saw them as her boys, good-hearted, misunderstood men. She refused to see the darkness consuming them. The Krays used her love to mask their crimes, appearing as devoted sons who took care of their family and community. They donated money to locals, attended charity events, and helped struggling neighbors. But make no mistake, this generosity wasn't kindness. It was strategy. Every favor bought loyalty, Every gift bought silence. Soon, the Krays began mingling with the British elite. Politicians, aristocrats, and entertainers were drawn to their charisma. Ronnie, who was openly bisexual, developed connections with influential figures in both the criminal and political worlds, relationships that gave the twins even more protection. Their names appeared in gossip columns, their photos in glossy magazines. London had never seen gangsters like them before, glamorous, dangerous, and untouchable. But the illusion of perfection was beginning to crack. Ronnie's mental health was deteriorating rapidly. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he suffered violent mood swings and delusions. He believed people were plotting against him, even his own men. His paranoia made him volatile, and his rages left a trail of destruction. Reggie tried. By 1966, the Kray Twins' empire was at its peak. But behind the luxury suits, fast cars, and celebrity parties, the foundation of their criminal world was cracking. Power had fed their egos, fame had blinded their judgment, and madness was beginning to consume them both. What started as a business built on fear was now spiraling into a nightmare of blood and paranoia. The turning point came on March 9th, 1966, inside the Blind Beggar pub in Whitechapel. Ronnie Kray entered calmly, wearing his signature tailored suit, flanked by his men. At the bar sat George Cornell, a member of the rival Richardson gang, a man bold enough to insult Ronnie publicly, calling him a fat poof. For Ronnie, humiliation was worse than death. Without hesitation, he pulled a 9mm Luger pistol from his coat and shot Cornell in the head in front of nearly a dozen witnesses. Silence fell. The crowd froze, terrified. Ronnie placed the gun down on the counter, straightened his tie, and said coldly, "He won't be saying anything else now." Then he walked out as if nothing had happened. Everyone knew who did it, everyone saw it, but no one dared to talk. Such was the power of the Kray name. Even murder in public couldn't touch them. Witnesses feared that speaking up would be a death sentence. The law remained silent, and Ronnie's confidence grew into delusion. He began to believe he was invincible. Meanwhile, Reggie Kray was fighting demons of his own. His marriage to Frances Shay had crumbled under the weight of his violent world. Frances was young, kind, and fragile, completely unprepared for the darkness that surrounded the Kray brothers. Reggie loved her deeply, but couldn't escape the chaos of his empire or the influence of his unstable twin. The pressure and fear tore Frances apart. In 1967, she took her own life, a tragedy that shattered what little humanity Reggie had left. Those close to him said he was never the same again. His grief turned into cold, uncontrollable rage. Not long after, that rage found a target. Jack the Hat McVitie, a small-time criminal who had worked with the twins, became the next name on their death list. McVitie had failed to deliver on a drug deal and had openly insulted Reggie. In the twins' world, disrespect meant death. During a supposed meeting at a house party in Hackney, Reggie snapped. Fueled by anger, alcohol, and heartbreak, he attacked McVitie in front of their gang members. Witnesses later described the scene as pure horror. Reggie stabbed Jack repeatedly, shouting that no one would ever betray the Krays again. When McVitie's lifeless body hit the floor, Reggie stood silently, breathing heavily, covered in blood. No one moved. No one spoke. The room reeked of death and fear. That single moment destroyed the Kray Twins' empire. The myth of the charming gentleman gangsters died that night, replaced by the reality of brutal murderers. The witnesses, once loyal out of fear, began to rethink their silence. The aura of invincibility was gone. The killings had crossed every boundary. Even their closest allies began to whisper that the twins had lost control. Ronnie's mental illness deepened after the killings. He became more paranoid, convinced that people were plotting against him, even Reggie. He carried weapons everywhere, trusted no one, and often erupted in violent rages without warning. Reggie tried to hold things together, but his grief, guilt, and exhaustion consumed him. Together, the twins spiraled into chaos, trapped between their own madness and the collapsing empire they once ruled. The police, humiliated for years, finally saw their chance. Detectives quietly began building a case, interviewing terrified witnesses, and piecing together the truth behind the twins' bloody crimes. But by the time Scotland Yard was ready to strike, the Krays had already destroyed themselves. The murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie weren't just crimes. They were the beginning of the end. The Kray twins had become prisoners of their own violence, two brothers lost in a world of madness, pride, and blood. The kings of London's underworld were now standing on the edge of their own downfall, and there was no turning back. By 1967, the Kray twins' iron grip on London was slipping. Their empire, once built on fear and loyalty, was now rotting from the inside. Former allies whispered about betrayal, the police were closing in, and the twins themselves were spiraling out of control. The glamour that once made them untouchable had turned into arrogance, and arrogance became their downfall. Reggie was a broken man after the death of his wife, Frances Shea. Her suicide had torn something inside him apart. The cold, calculating gangster was replaced by a man haunted by guilt and anger. Ronnie, meanwhile, had completely lost touch with reality. His violent paranoia, fueled by mental illness, turned him into a ticking bomb. He trusted no one, not even Reggie. The once inseparable twins were now bound by madness rather than loyalty. The empire they'd built through charm, intimidation, and brutality began to crumble. Their men no longer feared them. They feared the police more. Scotland Yard had finally decided that enough was enough. Detectives Leonard Nipper Red and his team spent years gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and tracking every crime linked to the twins. They knew taking down the Krays wouldn't be easy. Witnesses were too scared to talk, but they also knew that fear doesn't last forever. Inside the gang, cracks widened. Some of the Krays' closest associates, once fiercely loyal, began turning against them. The killings of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie were too public, too brutal, and too reckless. The Krays had gone from cunning criminals to careless murderers. Their actions didn't just terrify rivals, they disgusted their own men. The breaking point came when the police finally found enough witnesses willing to talk. Quietly and strategically, they built a mountain of evidence. Every murder, every threat, every shady deal. It all began to surface. By 1968, Scotland Yard made its move. In a series of coordinated raids, police stormed the Krays' homes in the early morning hours. The reign of fear that had haunted London for a decade was over in a single night. The arrests sent shockwaves across Britain. The twins, who once rubbed shoulders with celebrities and politicians, were now photographed being dragged away in handcuffs. The media exploded with headlines. The Krays finally caught. For the first time, the legends looked vulnerable. Two men stripped of power, facing the full weight of justice. Their trial became one of the most sensational court cases in British history. Journalists filled the courtroom, spectators queued outside just to get a glimpse of the infamous twins. Behind bars, Reggie tried to stay calm, but Ronnie's erratic behavior made everything worse. Witness after witness took the stand, exposing the brutality the public had once glamorized. The prosecution's case was devastating. Multiple gang members turned informants, revealing details of beatings, murders, and extortion. The Krays' aura of invincibility evaporated. For the first time, London saw them not as charming folk heroes, but as what they truly were: violent, paranoid, and ruthless killers. On March 4, 1969, after one of the longest and most publicized trials in British history, Ronnie and Reggie Kray were both found guilty of murder. The judge sentenced them to life imprisonment, recommending that they never be released. The courtroom erupted. The empire of the Kray Twins, once feared, respected, and untouchable, was finally crushed. As the prison doors closed behind them, the myth of the Kray Twins began to fade. The streets they once ruled grew quieter. The clubs they owned shut down. And London, for the first time in years, could breathe again. But even in defeat, the Krays remained legends, symbols of how power built on violence always ends the same way, in madness, betrayal, and ruin. When the Kray Twins were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1969, many believed their story had ended. But in truth, it was only the beginning of their legend. Even behind bars, Ronnie and Reggie continued to cast a long, dark shadow over Britain. Their names still echoed through London's East End, not as criminals, but as myths. People whispered their stories in pubs and alleyways, half in fear, half in admiration. The Krays had achieved what few gangsters ever could. They had become immortal through infamy. Inside prison, the twins were separated for the first time in their lives. Ronnie was declared insane and sent to Broadmoor Hospital, where he would spend the rest of his days under psychiatric care. Reggie was imprisoned at Pentonville and later Wayland Prison, where he tried to hold on to the fragments of his once mighty empire. The brothers wrote letters to each other, trying to maintain their bond, but the distance, both physical and emotional, grew heavier with every year. Ronnie's mental state continued to deteriorate. He often told interviewers that he felt no remorse for his crimes. "I regret nothing," he once said, his cold eyes betraying no emotion. Reggie, however, became more reflective. The loss of Francis still haunted him. Decades in prison had stripped away the arrogance that once defined him. He began reading, writing, and even speaking to journalists about his regrets. But always carefully, never fully confessing the truth. He wanted to control the story, even from behind bars. The world outside had changed. London's criminal landscape moved on, replaced by new gangs and new faces. Yet, none captured the same chilling combination of charisma and cruelty that the Krays had embodied. As years passed, books, films, and documentaries began to romanticize their story. The twins became symbols of old-school crime, gangsters who lived by a code of loyalty and respect. But that image was far from the truth. In reality, the Kray Twins' empire was built on fear, violence, and manipulation. Their so-called loyalty was an illusion. Their power depended on silence and suffering. Those who dared to oppose them were beaten, broken, or buried. They didn't protect their community. They terrorized it. The idea that they were gentlemen gangsters was a dangerous myth, one that blurred the line between respect and fear. Yet the public fascination only grew. Movies like The Krays, 1990, and Legend, 2015, turned them into pop culture icons, played by glamorous actors. Their sharp suits, slicked hair, and confident swagger were remembered more than their victims. For many, especially younger generations, the Krays became part of British folklore, the kings of the East End. But for those who lived under their reign, the memories were far darker. Ronnie died in 1995 at Broadmoor, still unrepentant, still convinced of his own legend. Reggie was released from prison in 2000 on compassionate grounds after being diagnosed with cancer. He died just weeks later, a broken man, far from the king he once imagined himself to be. When his funeral took place in the East End, crowds lined the streets, not out of fear this time, but out of curiosity. They wanted to glimpse the end of an era, the final chapter of a myth that refused to die. Today, the Kray Twins remain symbols of contradiction, admired and despised, remembered and condemned. Their story is more than just a tale of crime. It's a reflection of how society can blur the line between fame and infamy. The Krays ruled through fear, but became famous through fascination. In the end, their greatest victory wasn't the empire they built. It was the legend they left behind. A legend that still reminds us how dangerous it is when evil wears a charming face and when monsters become myths.